Hey everyone, I'm going to talk about The Last of Us today, a game that came out recently for the PS3 that has received many awards and very high critical acclaim. However, after recently playing it, it's kind of difficult to see how it matches up to the reviews it has been getting, such as 10 out of 10 is a perfect game, the defining game of this generation. A lot of things have been said about this game, but my personal experience with it has been much less than what I expected. The Last of Us is a game that has been hyped up due to the realism of the game, not only in its environments, in its AI, and also in its storytelling. That was a really big aspect of the game, that the story was very good. And honestly, I'm the kind of gamer who plays games for atmosphere and story and things like that. So when I first heard that this was one of the big games, not only of this generation, but also an exclusive for the PS3, it grabbed my attention. Also being made by Naughty Dog, the people who made the last three Uncharted games, this game sounded more or less promising. However, The Last of Us is, quite frankly, at best, mediocre in my opinion. And I'm gonna just list off some reasons why. So first of all, the story, more so the characters. You basically have Joel, this old gruff kind of father figure, and Ellie, this girl who's still blossoming and maturing. The relationship between Joel and Ellie is not very interesting, and it's not that deep whatsoever. The characters themselves, I'd say, are interesting, but the relationship they have isn't really that deep. It's basically Joel has to protect Ellie, and Ellie kind of challenges Joel in different ways in terms of their survival and also trying to reconcile with his daughter's death at the beginning of the game. And quite frankly, the only sort of relationship they have is this sort of very pent-up anger relationship. Everyone in the apocalypse is just angry, which makes sense, of course, but there has to be some sort of bonding beyond that anger. And while that happens to some extent, I never really felt that Joel and Ellie really got past the point of maybe being friends. I never really felt that Joel saw Ellie as his daughter, or that Ellie saw Joel as her father figure. At most, they saw each other as dependents that they could, rely on in order for survival, and I felt it really never developed past that point. Secondly, all the characters you do come across do have a certain presence, and they are somewhat memorable, but they're more or less all the same character, to be honest. They're these angry, disgruntled people who are willing to do anything to get their way. Specifically, Marlene and Daniel are practically the same character in some ways. Also on the software point, but also in storytelling, all of the characters... well, the game is divided between defeating the infected and the actual human scavengers that are trying to kill you and get your stuff. Well, what I didn't expect it to be was another generic zombie shooter where these are just the bad guys and you have to kill them. And honestly, that's more or less what it felt like. What I expected from this game was that you would feel some remorse when killing these people because you'd have to realize that they're people just like you. But Naughty Dog, or at least from a software aspect or whatnot, there was no AI behavior that signified they were any different from the infected or any other enemy, to be honest. I mean, they'd use human-like tactics to attack you, but there was no real emotion during the combat. It was just, these are the enemies, please kill them, in order to proceed to the next level. And I found that pretty disappointing, to be honest. Also, another thing that kind of iffed me around was that one of the villains, Daniel, who basically captures Ellie and has his own community of people, the only real reason you have to kill this guy or go after his entire platoon is the fact that they eat human meat. That's the only reason. That's the only sort of motivation you have for killing all these people. And then the fact he kidnaps Ellie, but honestly, besides the whole eating human meat part, they're not that evil. They're just trying to survive. And I felt like the fact that they just put in the fact that they ate humans was just kind of like this really cheap, short-sighted motivation point for you to go after these guys. From a gameplay aspect, The Last of Us, quite frankly, and I don't say this about many games, it's a game that is too long. It really felt like it dragged on for a long, long time, more than it should have. The Last of Us, traditionally, it's a lot like the Uncharted series, where the gameplay is divided into platforming and action, and occasional stealth. It gets rather tedious throughout the entire game. With graphics in games nowadays, everything is so realistic, so detailed, that it is really hard to pick up these little trinkets you need to find in order to craft different weapons or just general collectibles. I found myself spending an inordinate amount of time just going around trying to find things that I was just scavenging the environment for. Not that I needed them, I just wanted to collect them. And I felt like that was supposed to be part of the experience, that you're supposed to be in this survival mode and, trying to find as many supplies as you can before someone else did. But quite frankly, The Last of Us is a linear storyline game. There's not much deviation from what you can and cannot find. At the end of the day, it is a game and not the real world. So, because it's closed off and more or less there are a limited amount of things and you expect a certain amount of things in certain areas, that whole aspect of survival and opportunistic pathfinding really just falls away as a nice idea that could have been in the game or should have been in the game but simply can't. And just to continue on environments, most of the environments in this game do feel, well, boring. I mean, I know I was trying to depict the post-apocalypse, and so it's more or less just destroyed out, burned, blasted out buildings. And quite frankly, that's pretty much the entire game, and it gets very tedious. Besides the nature parts, that's more or less the entire game. And it gets very boring to see the same palette of colors over and over again. And honestly, I can really attest to this because the one time in the game where it was not that environment, specifically the university level, I was blown away because it was something just so completely different from the rest of the game. In the university level, it's the first level that takes place in the fall sequence of the game. And I was just blown away by the colors of the trees and the wind and the somewhat still intact university building. Riding along its corridors on horseback, that was an amazing experience, I do admit, but only possibly because in comparison to the rest of the game, it's bland, gray, boring, and dull. There's practically no color or life in anything, which is appropriate for this game because it's trying to be as realistic as possible, but honestly, it is being way too realistic to the point where it is just boring and unengaging, and quite frankly, that's my entire experience that has been The Last of Us. Also, most of the game, it is divided into 4 different seasons, and the somewhat aggravating part I found was that for more than half the game, it takes place in the summer season, which is the first part. And I only find this aggravating because it really isn't fair, I think, to the other seasons, and it feels like you're stuck almost in the same kind of environment for a really long time. By the time you get to the other seasons, it almost doesn't matter. But they are really refreshing to see as a change of environment, because God knows we need it. As you go through each environment, you are basically, while you're dispatching enemies or platforming through the level, you are given a goal or a task to go towards. This task is usually some building off in the distance or some character you have to find. And quite honestly, the overall story of The Last of Us, or the plot, is really just, well, boring as well. There are objectives that you have to reach that simply are just forgettable. When you have to make it to some bridge or some hospital, and you usually forget why most of the time, then you just kind of go blindly through these levels, kind of losing vision of what exactly you're supposed to do. There's one part in the game where you have to find a guy because he owes you some guns. There's another part of the game where you're trying to find this group called the Fireflies, and quite frankly, there's no real overarching theme except that you have to get Ellie to some doctor so that they can help make a vaccine. But besides that, most of the environments that you're in are simply about surviving, which I guess is still once again appropriate for this game, but it feels bland and none of these events actually add to the overall story. The overall story still remains that get Ellie to a scientist to get a vaccine, and that's the entire story right there. Ellie needs to go to the doctor so that they can make a vaccine because she's immune to the virus. That's it throughout the entire game, and that kind of sucks. Then again, though, I kind of expected this game to focus more so on characters and atmosphere, and still, even in those departments, they are lacking. I guess some other things I might want to mention about The Last of Us is that the load times for loading a level, not necessarily progressing from level to level, but loading a new game or starting a chapter from the main menu, takes a really strange amount of time. Even installing The Last of Us took more than usual than other PS3 games. That's kind of a little tidbit. Some other little things were that there were a couple of glitches I encountered, like characters, or more specifically enemies. I threw an enemy to a certain point on this ledge, and he disappeared, and I thought he was dead, or he was just simply gone from the game, but I started walking away. He respawned and started shooting me right in the back. On the good side, though, I do have to say this. While Joel and Ellie don't have exactly a really deep or interesting relationship, the characters themselves do stand out. Joel sort of goes through his reconciliation with the death of his daughter while trying to find a real purpose in life, since he's aging and needs to find something to live for. Ellie is probably the more interesting character, and possibly almost the main character of the game, as she kind of is also trying to find her purpose for living and develops her character through different interactions with Joel and the environment. And she's just honestly a more interesting character because she's still maturing and has a very different perspective on things than the other characters. Considering her affluence for childlike curiosity and hope and envisionment, she has a lot of interesting interactions and conversations. And I think that's where possibly the best part of The Last of Us comes in, where Joel and Ellie will have these, I call them ephemeral conversations, where they're conversations that are just really about nothing at all. Where Ellie will tell Joel about a dream she had about flying, or she'll talk about things that people worried about back then and make fun of them. And these certain insights are just these little quip moments that really flesh out her character in ways you wouldn't expect, and conversations that you kind of remember because they're just so weird and ridiculous that you remember them. Not to mention the amount of tremendously bad jokes she has throughout the game from a joke book she picks up. A couple of other good things about the story, and specifically about Ellie, is that at one point of the game, Ellie does get captured by this big, bad guy, basically. And it's up to you to rescue her. However, what I really enjoyed was that Ellie not only escapes from her captors, but also is able to take most of them down and kill the guy that captured her. I was expecting Joel to basically rescue Ellie, or at least kill the guys, but it really challenged my expectations, as it showed that Ellie was more than capable to take down this guy. But it was that really nice sort of equality of teamwork, how they both handle the situation despite being separated. Also, the voice acting in this game is phenomenal. It is very well done. The way the voices echo in other rooms and the way the voice acting is done is just great. There's just nothing more to be said about that. It's just really great voice acting. It brings the characters to life, and it's really nice. Also, I think I should probably mention about the gameplay. The gameplay at first is kind of boring because you're set with the same weapon and the same kind of enemy and situations and whatnot. I felt it only became really enjoyable once you started upgrading your weapons and modifying them to suit the situation. Also, another thing I really like about this game is the way they use ammo. It is very appropriate for a post-apocalyptic game where your ammo is very scarce throughout most of the game, and you need to be very wise with how you spend it. You cannot go guns blazing, or you will find yourself quickly in a very bad situation. I also enjoy the level of gore in this game. While I'm not exactly a huge gore fanatic, the way they styled the gore when you shot someone, or whether it be long range or close range, gave a very disturbingly realistic but also satisfying feeling of the flow of the blood from the body. Along with the stealth in the game, when you had to sneak around the infected, there were some very tense moments that were very high tension environments, and I think those were done really well too. Also, another thing on the sound side is the music. The music in the game isn't exactly anything amazing, but it does fit its genre very well, with a very acoustic sort of, a lot of acoustic tracks, and a lot of them being very almost echoey and nostalgic in a way, which is perfect for this kind of game. I guess the last thing to talk about is the ending to the game, which is fairly controversial due to the brevity of its closure and the message it leaves the player with. What essentially happens is Joel is faced with the ultimatum that basically his daughter is going to be operated on in order to possibly get a vaccine to the a vaccine to the disease, rather. And, however, in the process, it will remove a part of her brain, therefore killing her. And, quite frankly, as the player in this position, I was totally okay with Ellie dying. I mean, she was an interesting character, but the bond between me and her, and Joel and her, wasn't that strong. More or less a protector kind of relationship. There wasn't ever a moment I felt where Joel and Ellie really had a soft moment, or a moment that really sort of bonded them in a really true way. So when this decision came up to basically kill Ellie for the sake of all of mankind, I was totally okay with this. However, Joel was not. It was kind of difficult to play the last part of the game because I totally did not feel motivated at all. Even Marlene, the person who was killing Ellie, did not have this stereotypical villainy sort of aspect to her. She confided in Joel before she went off to do the operation or commission it, that she had known Ellie before, since she was born, and through audio recordings and her own confessions, she said it's one of the hardest things she had to do, but she realized it's the right thing. And it in my opinion, yes, it is the right thing to do. And I'm just personally conflicted with the fact that Joel decided to just go after her. And more so, after he goes after her, he even, there's a scene in the game where you're about to rescue her, and you basically are put in this situation where you are at gunpoint with these unarmed doctors, and it's kind of ambiguous as to what has to happen. And And a lot of people said that this was a big decision for them in the gameplay, where they could choose to shoot the doctors or not try to shoot them. However, in the end, you do have to kill at least one of the doctors to get through to Ellie, which is what I did. I held the doctor at gunpoint, and I tried to find a way to subdue him because I really did not want to kill these people. Like, these people had a huge operation, doctors, scientists, science and trying to solve this problem that mankind had, and Joel is just there screwing the whole thing up for Ellie, and it's completely selfish. And more so, after you actually rescue Ellie from the compound, you end up killing Marlene, and basically at the end of the game, the last scene is that Ellie asks you, you basically have lied to her that the Fireflies don't need her anymore and they already found a cure, or looking for one, and Ellie asked him, Joel, if that's true or not, and Joel says he swears that it's all true. And so not only does Joel kill possibly the people who could have found the last remaining cure to this vaccine, and has completely destroyed their security and army and whatever, and their leader, he also lies to Ellie about all of this, and it is a completely self-centered, selfish asshole move. It's so completely selfish, and I understand in a way where they're trying to tell a very human story, and I understand it. That is what humanity is about, this sort of selfish nature, I suppose, that the apocalypse has wrought in people. But still, it did not make me feel comfortable ending that game, and that's basically where the game leaves off, with Joel lying to Ellie. Like, that's the end of the game. It's kind of like a slap in the face, to be honest, and it just kind of ends with him saying, I swear. On one hand, I have to give Naughty Dog perhaps some respect, because that is a very kind of unconventional way to end a game. To end a game on such a negative note, I can appreciate it because it was so perhaps unexpected. And one of my expectations was that Joel was going to die by the end of the game in order to give life and experience onto Ellie, and you pass it on to the youth, etc., as one of the themes. But that it's probably the exact opposite. Joel has not, given up his life or his existence in order to carry on Ellie. And quite frankly, I just sat there then in the game and realized that basically the one hope for humanity is with this old dude who's gonna die someday, and then Ellie's gonna have to fend for herself, and then she's gonna wish she had to sacrifice herself in order to get a vaccine, because then life will just go on as usual and nothing will be resolved. And that's what the end of The Last of Us is. Nothing is resolved. By the end of the game, my entire feeling of The Last of Us is that it's just a boring, depressing game. And quite frankly, it is nothing special. And it's really funny because the fan base of The Last of Us, or at least there are a lot of people on YouTube and forums and such that have been defending this game, saying that The Last of Us, yes, is, dare I say, a life-defining game that has changed people's lives, which, quite frankly, I find incredibly hard to see, because The Last of Us is, unfortunately, another generic zombie game. A well-made generic zombie game, but it's still a generic zombie game. I mean, it tries to be this really emotionally driven game, but it does not succeed there. And the reason I think it does not succeed in this aspect is that, well, look at the previous games that Naughty Dog has created. Naughty Dog originally did the Jak and Daxter series, which is this fantastical kind of universe, and Uncharted was, while it was set in sort of real life, and it still had these fantastical sort of areas and temples and dungeons and such to explore, and was fantastical as reality can get. And I guess the other thing is that throughout Uncharted, they found ways to craft mythical and fantastical elements into the game, like the hallucination sequence in Uncharted 3 was very vivid to me. The sort of yetis in the Nepal mountains And Uncharted 2 was also very memorable. The whole Tree of Life thing, while still keeping it in the realm of the real. This game is a post-apocalyptic, depressing, realistic game. It is realism to its finest point, and quite frankly, it is boring as hell, as it should be. Naughty Dog is a company about making stories and characters that are fun and charming and charismatic, and making a light-hearted, actiony experience. The Last of Us is a complete opposite. It's like asking Stephen King to write a comedy romance novel or something. It's simply the exact opposite of what Naughty Dog has done. The gameplay is there that feels like Naughty Dog, but the story is simply not. And that's not to say Naughty Dog can make good characters. They can. It's just the setting and the characters are so completely opposite from what they're used to. It really is no wonder that they did not make a very compelling or appropriate story that was all that likable. It was just really depressing and realistic, and that's kind of what the fans were asking for, or what they wanted with this game, and that's what they got. And that kind of sucks. It's just kind of a downer, really. This entire experience with The Last of Us is just one big, kind of depressing, boring game. And it's the last time I'm probably going to play it. I guess another thing, or another reason perhaps, why people were defending this game so vehemently, besides the fact it got 10 out of 10s and kind of gave them an excuse to say, oh, well, this is obviously an amazing game, IGN gave it a 10 out of 10, so I totally believe them. Aside from the fact that it was sort of promoted as to be this super emotional game, so people kind of went into that thinking, okay, so this is super emotional, and they tried to find ways or read into it to make it super emotional or interesting. And quite frankly, it really is none of those things, and it's mostly people reading into it, because quite frankly, this game did not affect me at all. Also, I think it's part of the whole exclusivity syndrome, considering that The Last of Us is a PS3 exclusive, and so people have to sort of inherit the need to promote it as something, or at least inherit the vision that this is something superior because it isn't exclusive. Simply because something isn't exclusive, that does not make it superior to any other game. It just makes it exclusive. That's it. So, in conclusion, The Last of Us is more or less a boring and sort of brow-beating, depressing game. That is to say, the gameplay is pretty okay, and at best, I'd say that The Last of Us is really, 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 really okay. It is a mediocre, okay game, and that's it, really. That's all there is to say. The main reason I made this review is because so many people were praising it for being something it's not. But I guess that's all there really is to say about it, and this is the last time I will play The Last of Us. Thank you for listening. I look forward to reviewing more games in the future and providing my feedback. See you till then.